This is George Sicalius, and this is Sprint 8. So this week I got a particle system up and running, and I had to go back into my DX code and revise my draw cycles in order to get that working. So I'll talk more about that later. So I'll start with my particle system. So in order to create a particle effect, the user has to create an emitter, adjust all the variables for their given effect, and then load that into the particle manager. I'm doing something a little bit differently compared to my other asset managers with particle manager. So user passes in the emitter. This gets stored inside of an emitter collection, and then this emitter collection is what's being mapped inside of the particle managers. So the emitter collection, all that is a class that just stores the instance of the emitter that the user created, as well as a pool, which is essentially just a copy of this emitter. So when the user calls get to get a given particle effect, they pass in the key. They call get, which calls get on the emitter collection, which will then either create a new one if there isn't one already in the pool, or it'll just pull from the pool and assign the variables as needed, and then passes that to the user. So yeah, that's the loading side of the particle system. The actual emitter and burst and all that stuff. So this is the emitter. So it's responsible. So it's the only thing that's alarmable and drawable. Burst and particle, I try to keep them bare bones. So emitter, it's responsible for starting the draw, the drawing of the particles, but burst and particle go into more detail when actually doing that. So it stores all of the variables necessary for creating the particle effect, along with I'm storing the bursts in a list and pooling them so I don't have to waste time creating new ones. So yeah. So, and then burst is responsible for creating the array of particles and then setting their values. And then particles, it just stores its world data, and then and then it just calls draw when emitter tells it to draw. So just to go over that process. So emitter, when its draw is called, where's its draw? Okay. So it'll go through its list of active bursts. It'll call draw on the bursts. And then the burst will then call draw on its array of particles, and then the particles will actually render themselves. So yeah, that's my particle system. I didn't get around to instancing, unfortunately. It's something I wanted to include in my project, but I'm a little short on time as of now. So my draw cycle, I mentioned that I had to do some revisions to it. So just to briefly summarize, so the way I have my draw cycle is set up, draw is called on my game engine, which draws the scene and all of the drawable objects will then call render, which should render the objects. So what's actually happening is, let me just pull up graphics objects, texture light. Okay. So the user calls this render. So what actually happens is it creates a command. It then passes that command to the shader, and then that shader will then execute the actual render when that shader is called to execute. So this just puts all the commands inside the shaders, and then this actually executes all of the commands within the shader. So previously, the way I was doing it was each graphic object would have its own draw command, and then I would just pass that to the given shader. However, like instances like this where I have one graphic object drawn 3 times, it would only draw the last position where that graphic object was located. It wouldn't draw all 3 of the same object in 3 different locations. So to fix that, I had to create a command factory, draw command factory. So the graphics objects, they no longer hold their own draw command. All the draw commands are just stored inside of this draw factory, and then they just use this factory to pass their given information to the shader. So yeah, with my previous setup, I wouldn't be able to do particle effects because it would only draw the last particle of the given graphics object, but now it doesn't do that. Well, yeah, I don't know. It's been a long week. So yeah, that's all I have.